Welcome everyone today to our webinar on the 5 things that successful enterprises do to adopt LPM. And I'm presenting today with Marshall Guillory. And Marshall, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I'll introduce myself.
Hello, everyone. Marshall Guillory. I'm the Vice President for the Government Practice for Agile Rising, also consulting some fairly well-known government organizations like NASA, the FAA, and the Veterans Administration. Super passionate about lean and agile practices, of course, and have long enjoyed my relationship with Richard, and super excited to talk about LPM today.
Excellent. I'm Richard Knaster. I'm a SAFE Fellow. I'm also a principal contributor to SAFE. I'm also part of Agile Rising and a principal consultant. And I'm also super passionate about lean portfolio management and strategy, as well as the entire SAFE framework, and really making the lives of people better. I think today it could be very difficult in today's work environment, and I like to help organizations transform to become more engaging and fun, because we spend too much time at work to not be enjoying what we do each day. So with that, we'll begin our presentation. And here is our agenda. And we're going to do this as more of a conversation than just a broadcast out to you. And Marshall and I will be kind of going back and forth with each other. So it's a more interactive type of presentation. So we'll provide some context for today's presentation as to why LPM is so important. We'll briefly review the key LPM responsibilities, briefly review what do we mean by a safe portfolio, and then we'll go into the meat of this discussion, which is about the 5 things successful enterprises do to adopt LPM, and then we'll also have a Q&A as well. So the very first thing is, why LPM? And Marshall, I'm sure you've run across a number of these challenges here. One of my favorites is that agility is limited by annual planning, the project model, and inflexible budget process. You spend like 3 months out of the year doing detailed project planning in order to have the budget for the following year. And as soon as the new year starts, all the things that you said you're going to do get thrown out the window, and you start with a completely different list. And then the other thing about that one is that, when you do traditional project portfolio management, it's more about picking amongst the best project ideas and not really have a purposeful journey of how do you get from the current state to where you want to go in the future state.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And we see that quite often with clients. And it's the nature of the history, I guess, of how organizations come to being, if you will, and what they've learned in their operating model. And interestingly, we spend a lot of time working with PMO organizations to help them to learn how to do this in a different way, which we're going to talk a lot about in this webinar.
All right, great. What's one of your favorites here, that your favorite challenge that you like to address?
Well, we're going to talk later about project to product. And I think that's a big mindset shift. And I enjoy the conversations with clients about that. And in many ways, it's challenging their ways of thinking directly with regard to funding. How do they fund their solutions in an organization? They, by and large, fund it through projects, and love conversations about continuity, project outcomes versus what potential product outcomes we could have. And it's a real game changer, I think, for clients once they realize that there perhaps is a way to get better business outcomes even than the way their current system works.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites too. And it's a challenging one to overcome, because organizations are so steeped in the project mindset, and their budgeting processes are still annual, and they're reluctant to go from a project to product mindset. But I think it's one of the most important factors in being successful with a lean and agile transformation and being successful with LPM. Another big thing that I see is quite a bit of a challenge out of this list here is that when you are in a project-led organization, you often place big bets on projects, and you come up with a plan and you come up with what the expected benefits are. But the problem is that often those bets don't pay off, and you spend a lot of time and money and not know till the very end whether or not your bet on that project is really going to result in any benefits.
Absolutely. I can recall over the past several decades, many IT projects, for example, ERP system upgrades. They're often associated with major upgrades with very high dollar numbers, 20 million, 30, 40, $50 million upgrades. And we get varied results that we see with clients. So one of the things that we can help organizations with is how do we decompose those large project batches into smaller experiments through the concepts that we teach in LPM.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think the other big, one of the biggest problems here too, besides the ones that we mentioned, is that we measure outputs versus outcomes. So, for example, in traditional project portfolio management, everyone is incented to focus on their tasks and completing tasks, and that's how the project progress is being measured, about how many tasks we complete. And I think everyone knows that if you ask developers what percentage they're done, they're usually done about 90% of the time, 90% complete. So it doesn't really tell us whether there's actually any progress being made. It just says how many tasks we've completed.
Yep. And because of that focus on outputs, and also the traditional nature of how organizations align themselves according to silos, is the way that we commonly discuss it, it doesn't incentivize teamwork, it incentivizes individual behavior. So in many ways, the mindset shift for how we measure our system and our system's performance needs to change as well, which of course LPM introduces some concepts for that as well.
Great. In fact, let's go into those concepts. I think people pretty much know these challenges, and that everyone is usually encountering these challenges. And if people want to put in chat any other challenges that they're encountering, that would be great too. So here we're showing the 3 dimensions of LPM, lean portfolio management in SAFe. And the 3 dimensions are strategy and investment funding, agile portfolio operations, and lean governance. And we're not going to go too deep on this slide here because this kind of content would need to be covered in our 2-day LPM course. It's just a lot of stuff. There's a lot of nuance to this, but you can see some of the things that are really important to do when you're implementing LPM. And probably the most important dimension of these 3 dimensions is strategy and investment funding, because that's where we're making the investment decisions. It's also how we're going to change our model, going from projects to products and funding products instead, becoming a product-led organization. And instead of having a plan drive the schedule and also the investment, what we can do that's better instead is to say, how much are we willing to invest in this particular initiative, whether it's doing sustaining innovation or creating a brand new product, and then limiting the scope of our work to the investment that we're willing to put out. So it's quite a different model. And of course, this is where we also come up with our strategy for the portfolio. And in another talk, we'll go into what do we mean by strategy, because I think everyone is confused by what strategy means. A lot of times people think it's just goals, it's just objectives, it's your mission, your vision. Everyone's confused about that. So we'll get into that another time. But you can see the major parts here about creating a vision for the portfolio, making sure people understand how the portfolio contributes to the enterprise, and that helps people within the organization understand how they contribute to the overall enterprise's strategy. We go from the current state to the future state using portfolio epics, and we promote decentralized decision-making in SAFe. So therefore, we want to have the guardrails to make sure that the agile release trains don't go off the track. And of course, having a fast flow of value is really important. Any other dimension here that you like to speak about, Marshall? What's your favorite next dimension after strategy, investment, funding?
Well, I'm a fan of all of them, of course, all really relevant and important to the function for LPM. I think in this case, I'll comment on Agile portfolio operations, particularly as a way to look at large complex systems. If you have an organization that has hundreds of teams, large scale organizations, how do you actually coordinate and create alignment across thousands of people, perhaps? That's a big question, and it's a complex area for solutioning. I think LPM is a necessity in a SAFe implementation in that scenario, of course, for most organizations, even though we have large solution SAFe. But when we think about coordinating multiple development value streams, our goal is to create alignment, but also to create a system that flows, as you've referred to. And creating systems that flow requires coordination activities. And your APO is creating and fostering and maintaining your operating model using the guidance and the principles and the framework. So APO, of course, in this case, is my pick.
Okay, and that's Agile Portfolio Operations when we say APO. And the last thing we'll just cover is lean governance, and then we've got enough context to continue our presentation. So this is in lean governance. One of the things we do is we forecast and budget dynamically. Even though we're kind of stuck with the annual budgeting model, we can, twice a year, we can update the budget, and we can also decide how we allocate the budget to different value streams. Of course, we want to measure our portfolio performance using objective measures. And when we look at how well we're progressing towards our product goals, is how we're doing with the features that we're developing or the MVP that we might be developing. We want to do lots of solution experiments before we make big bets on epics. We want to do small solution experiments. And of course, one of the things that we need to do is to have continuous compliance and not wait for it at the very end. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to accomplish our goals if we do that. So we just want to do one more context slide, and that is on what is a SAFe portfolio. So when we talk about a portfolio in SAFe, here we're talking about a set of related development value streams, and that we organize arts and teams within those development value streams, and we organize the people around the solutions that we are going to be selling to our customers. So development value streams create solutions that the operational value streams sell to customers or that they use to do their jobs, which is to serve the customer. So each of these development value streams, they build solutions, they support them. It's both keeping the lights on as well as developing new features. And the portfolio helps ensure that where all the value streams are aligned on building the things which are most important to the overall portfolio of our products or solutions. And when we say solutions or products, we kind of use that interchangeably also to include the meaning of services. So, again, if you want to learn more about these topics, you can learn about that in our upcoming LPM course. But now we want to go on to the heart of the presentation, this discussion rather, about the 5 things successful enterprises do to adopt LPM. And Marshall, do you want to take the very first one?
Sure, I'd love to.
And you know what? Before we do that, just because otherwise we'll end up repeating ourselves, I'm just going to put the 5 things that successful enterprises do to adopt LPM. And Marshall's going to start with the very first one about adopting and improving LPM practices early in the SAFe implementation.
Thank you, Richard. So as you can see, this graphic shows the Scaled Agile Framework implementation roadmap. And in version 6 of the Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe, we have now pushed the LPM course, and of course the implementation of LPM as a function to a much earlier stage in your transformation, if you will, or leading change or your change management plan. This has become really relevant as myself, Richard, other consultants, we've through practice realized that in many systems, implementing LPM early actually is a benefit to the overall implementation. And the reason why is we can begin to involve executives, leaders, managers in the process of change and also their learning journey. Because when we implement lean and agile practices, it's not just for the quote people doing the work. Executives do work too, and managers, and we want everybody to adopt the practices. So introducing LPM in what we sometimes refer to as a parallel implementation to launching agile release trains, which we discuss in other webinars and other videos, is a function of engagement with the right people, the right stakeholder groups as part of your organizational design for this change management plan. So when Agile Rising consultants engage with clients, we of course do a lot of discovery work, and we follow the SAFe implementation roadmap. And throughout that process, we very often find that through our experience, we can see that clients will probably need a lean portfolio management function in their end game implementation. So why not get started early? This means beginning discussions with stakeholder groups, executives, managers, leaders, etc., financial analysts and financial management, the CFO, if you will, in your organization, and begin the process of leading change just as you would with technical teams, development teams. And that invokes that parallel implementation of LPM. What this allows you to do is begin your change management practice along with launching agile release trains. So your entire design for your portfolios can follow the implementation roadmap pattern, and you can adapt and make sure that we have alignment across those two implementations.
Yeah, one of the favorite things I like to do when we implement LPM early is that oftentimes leaders really don't know what we mean to be lean or agile and how it applies in their context. And what I find is when we start LPM at the same time that we are launching trains, we now give them something to really understand in their own context. And I find that this helps really accelerate the implementation of SAFe because they understand how lean and agile apply in their world. So I think that's a big important. And when your implementation of SAFe has stalled, implementing LPM can often reinvigorate it. And Marshall, perhaps you can talk about what are some of the things that we can do very early on when implementing LPM, and then perhaps later in the transformation we might implement other parts.
Sure. Thank you, Richard. Well, the LPM implementation map, which we shared here in part, as you can see, there's a much more detailed version as well in the Scaled Agile Framework materials. But a couple of key things. One, as with any change, we want to make sure that we have that guiding coalition following John Cotter's change management process that's built into the framework. So that guiding coalition is in part guiding the overall transformation, but you're going to need those same folks to guide your LPM implementation. And they are the folks that are going to have the answers about how do we build the LPM team or establish the LPM function, who will actually participate and attend the LPM course, who will actually attend and facilitate and participate in the process of lean portfolio management. So those are discussions that you should have early on with your stakeholders that are involved in your transformation. Secondly, it's really important, just like when we're launching an agile release train, to plant the flag, if you will. We want to launch the art. We don't want to endlessly prepare seeking perfection rather than seeking improvement. So scheduling the LPM events, in other words, scheduling the class itself, getting people the knowledge and education that they need to understand LPM functions, but also scheduling your portfolio sync events, your strategic portfolio review events, and other events that you're going to use to facilitate the process of portfolio management using lean thinking. Identifying strategic themes early in the game. This most often in many of our implementations means identifying work that is already in flight. What are the big initiatives that we have going on in our organization now? Perhaps they were organized and funded via a project. What will be the discussions that you will have as a safe practice consultant to help your client transition from project thinking, big bang, big batch projects, to lean thinking with hypotheses that we'll be testing as part of a lean business case and a safe epic. So identifying that strategy and those themes very early in the game, creating those backlog items and getting some momentum behind them and connecting them to the people who do the work is another really important part of the early stages in your LPM. Establishing the budgets and the guardrails as well, which Richard and I will continue to discuss moving forward. And then finally, we have to have an operational Kanban system so that we can enable flow. So you definitely want to have either a tool or a Kanban on the wall, if you will, a system to manage flow early in the game.
But in other words, you don't need to implement all of LPM in the beginning. You can just start with some of these items, and then later on, we can extend the practices that we do in LPM as we launch more trains. The other thing that's kind of new in SAFe 6, and Marshall, you talked about the guiding coalition. But along with that, one of the things that we found is that we want to create an executive team which follows, or organize an executive team which is following Agile practices to help guide lean portfolio management. So you're seeing possible people that might be in this group, CEOs, CFOs, Chief Security Officer, Chief Product Officer, mainly all the C-levels. I also like to have an RTE or so in that mix as well. And this group supports the LACE, and we'll also be talking about on the next slide about the Value Management Office instead of a Agile program office or a PMO, traditional PMO. And they're helping decide, this group here, this executive team, they're at the highest levels of the enterprise, and they're going to help determine how much budget each portfolio should get, because in a large enterprise, typically it has more than one portfolio. These executives also need to collaborate with executives within the LPM function to collaborate on the strategic themes that portfolio will work on, because that's how they connect the work that they're doing in their portfolio to the enterprise's strategy, to make sure that we have alignment with all of our portfolios to the enterprise's strategy. And this will also help prevent duplicate work, or sometimes what happens is when you have traditional project portfolio management is that one project may negate another project, or it may cause us to get very delayed because it's the same pool of people that's being used. So along that lines, we also want to start transforming the PMO to a value management office. And perhaps, Marshall, you can share your thoughts on, going from a traditional PMO to a VMO.
Sure. So this always begins with knowledge. So we use SAFe courseware to educate people on the new ways of working, if you will, ways of thinking. And there needs to be a facilitated journey, which is why we use SAFe practice consultants. And the VMO has to be created with intent. So when you look at traditional PMOs, we often have people who have been operating in that model for many, many years. There are often, for example, in the case of our government clients, documents that define exactly how that process works. It's often phase gated. So the process begins with gathering leaders who can help drive that, a coalition, if you will, within the PMO, perhaps the senior leader of that group, that is willing to try something new. And in many cases, for example, at NASA, with their Office of the CIO, operates the PMO for NASA, and they were willing to do a branch in their 7120 process, it's called. That's the first step in transitioning to a true value management organization. What we're ultimately gunning for is to actually change the way of working, to migrate from project thinking to product thinking. So the VMO gives people a new model, a new operating model, a new way to facilitate and manage risk at an enterprise level, for example, using lean and agile governance. It also allows an organization at an enterprise level to interact in a lean and agile way with all the people doing the work. So Rich alluded to projects competing for prioritization and budgets. We can, in many ways, mitigate all those common problems that we see in project management or program management by actually applying lean budgeting concepts and having the VMO focus ultimately on outcomes and our hypotheses that are embedded in our epics. So the VMO becomes a central focus on accelerating value delivery to clients rather than, in my experience and opinion, a reactive organization that simply manages the latest project that has the most attention.
Right. And also, it's often the PMO has traditionally been the place where project managers report into. And so it reinforces the project model, and we really want to go from project to product. So now let's talk about that a little bit more. What do we mean when we go from project to product? So that means that today, in most organizations, people are organized in a functional silo, and then temporary project teams are created where they will do work. We'll create a lean business case, we'll fund that project, and often we are identifying every possible thing that we might want to implement in that project, and then having the plan, having the scope drive the plan. And basically, when we do that, we're making big bets, and we don't even know if the benefits that we have in our very detailed business case are really, we're going to achieve those benefits. And I always kid around and I say I'm one of the best fiction writers of all time because I wrote so many business cases in my past life. And I didn't realize at the time how much fiction was in those business cases because, it was based, my ROI was always on spot on. I had a 5-year cash analysis. I had net present value. I had internal rate on return. And basically any business case I wrote, would get approved by the CFO. But the problem was nobody really spent a lot of time looking at the assumptions that ROI was based upon. And you know what? Nobody ever even checked after the project was implemented whether or not we got those benefits. So that's a huge, huge problem. And as Marshall mentioned earlier, phase gates are not the best thing to use. Certainly the way they're defined today, they cause waterfall execution to happen because we got to get all the requirements done, sign off on those, get all design done, sign off on all those, and so on. Instead, we want to organize people in value streams and arts so that people are organized around the products and services that our organization offers to customers. We can also adjust how much money each value stream gets twice per year. So even though we can't change the overall annual budget, we can decide which value streams are going to get more capacity, and we can make those changes twice a year. In very disruptive markets, we might do that more often, but it can be very difficult to have where your budgets are changing on a quarterly basis. Of course, the lean business cases. We don't want to spend, I've seen business cases go on for 18 months before we got approval on that. Well, wouldn't it have been made more sense to use that time to actually do some solution experiments to see if the business outcomes that we want to achieve, that we're making progress towards them using some kind of leading indicators to know if we're on the right track to making that progress. And of course, we want to be using objective measures and milestones. So we'll talk a little bit later on about what some of those objective measures and milestones might be. And Marshall, perhaps you can speak a little bit more about how we organize the portfolio around this value.
Sure. Thank you, Richard. SAFE has a concept of value streams that's unique to the framework. We think of value streams in really three different ways: business value streams, or operational value streams, and development value streams. Development value streams are what many of us in the IT and software business are already familiar with. We think of the word development as producing a software product or an IT product. But because of business agility, there are many other ways in which we can think about development value streams today, by including all the rest of the organization. So we organize the portfolio around value because we organize our people and our systems around development value streams. And then the way in which we create value in those development value streams is through a social construct, if you will, called an Agile release train, or a team of teams. This is not a one-to-one relationship. We can have really large development value streams. For example, if you worked at Boeing and you built commercial passenger aircraft, there are literally thousands upon thousands, tens of thousands of even people, vendors, suppliers, et cetera, involved in developing a functional and safe aircraft. Therefore, because of the social construct of an Agile release train, there would probably be many different types of Agile release trains that would need to execute and deliver value. So we move away from organizing teams into completely independent, disconnected units that are most often very larger than what we would like an Agile team to be, to actually being aligned around value by focusing on solutions and products. Additionally, we have the benefit of creating alignment when we have large cyber-physical systems with thousands of people. So we have clients, for example, at NASA that have 800 to 1,200 people in a single portfolio. Prior to that, they were organized around projects. We have been trying to help them to come together and think about what are the solutions and products that they're delivering to the administration, to NASA, which means in their business, the missions. It's all about the missions. It's all about rockets and spaceships and going to Mars. So even though it is an IT function, for example, we would want folks to come together and think about how can we construct this network organized around value that has multiple development value streams and multiple Agile release trains, that is ultimately a portfolio, if you will. So organizing the portfolio around value becomes incredibly important for organizational design and ultimately for developing great business outcomes.
Yeah, speaking of that, one of the things that we don't want to do is we want to reintroduce the value stream network. In other words, when you first start an organization, it looks like the diagram on the left where you see those nodes. It's more like a network. In the middle might be the CEO, and anyone can speak to anyone. It's very intrapreneurial. We can operate at the speed of innovation. But we don't want to toss out the traditional hierarchy. It still serves a purpose because it helps us improve our efficiency and improve our stability. We still need managers when we implement SAFE. In fact, they're the ones who can change the systems that get in the way of operating as a team of Agile teams, and also a portfolio of value streams which contain multiple teams of teams. So we don't want to completely disrupt the organization. And again, there are benefits that come from both of these organizational models, the value stream network, as well as the traditional hierarchy. The next topic we want to speak about is that in order to be successful going from project to product, is that we want to be in a continuous delivery model. And we want to move away from projects. So what is the replacement, if you're not doing projects and you have a very large initiatives, features themselves are not enough. You need, you can have a very large program. It might be some cyber physical systems like Marshall works with NASA, but you also may work in an insurance company or banking or any number of businesses that need to do large initiatives that might take multiple program increments, and they may require multiple agile release trains and value streams to implement, but we don't want to get back to the project model. So we will implement epics. They're similar, but they operate very differently. And if you go into the Scaled Agile framework, into the epics article, it will show you a comparison between projects and epics. And when we go to this continuous delivery model and we organize our people around the value streams and arts which produce those products, as Marshall was mentioning, that allows us to have long-lived, stable teams. And that means that we will move with faster speed. We will retain the knowledge and the relationships that you get when you have stable teams. People know how each other works. You start learning a business domain. And so it's a much different experience. We also want to make all of the work visible in the portfolio Kanban, whether you're doing epics or whether you're doing traditional projects, because we want to see how much capacity both the traditional projects and the epics are using. And of course, our goal is to transition from projects to epics if we have really large things. But a lot of things can be done on a much small scale, just simply using features and delivering a steady stream of features to each Agile release train, who then releases them into production. There's also a thing in SAFe called the Business Agility Value Stream. And what that helps us do is, what happens when we want to bring a brand new product to market? I think most of us are enhancing existing products, existing services, but the Business Agility Value Stream here is talking about creating a brand new product, and perhaps it may result in a brand new development value stream, and may as well bring a new operational value stream. So the next topic that we want to discuss is something new and SAFe, and that is principle number 6, and that's make value flow without interruptions. And Marshall, can you articulate what do we mean by flow in SAFe?
By flow. So let's take a step back and think about traditional project management at enterprise scale, if you will, like a NASA, for example, or any commercial client you can think of. There's no real cadence or synchronization to projects. Projects come along, leaders want them, or customers want them, and they get funded, and we go and we find the matrix of people and resources, and we start the project, we assign a project manager, and it executes. Well, what happens is that results in people being pulled to various projects and fractionally allocated, we call it. And fundamentally, as a human, when you ask people to work on many projects all simultaneously, there's a lot of distraction that comes along with that, and waste that comes along with that. So we don't really see flow, because the projects are always competing for the same resources, because most organizations don't have unlimited resources.
So in other words, the organization is more focusing on completing their tasks than having a fast flow of value.
Yeah, it is almost like that. They're task oriented rather than outcome oriented. And so when we think about flow, what we want to do is take our people and we want to create a system for them that actually enables flow. And there's a lot of things that need to change in that mindset, values, principles, and the practices themselves. And what we see is, when we implement the practices that are embedded in the Scaled framework, for example, we can help people to organize their work and their teams in a way that actually enables flow to happen, by no longer, for example, pulling people and putting them on projects, but moving the work instead of the people, as we say it.
But and that new principle 6 is all about how do we make flow occur without interruption. And there's an article at every level of the framework, including the portfolio, which tells you how to apply the different flow accelerators at each level of SAFe. And we're going to get to those in a few minutes. Now, the other thing that was introduced in SAFe 6 was the concept of value stream management. So exactly what is value stream management and how it can help? Well, value stream management is a way that we can optimize people, process, and technology to optimize the flow of business value for end-to-end solution delivery. The real focus is on getting a faster flow of customer value, identifying the bottlenecks that are in the organization. What are the things that are really get in the way that inhibit flow? What are the delays caused by, and how can we eliminate delays? Because those will reduce the time to market. So value stream management is a very new discipline as it relates to software and systems development, like those cyber physical systems Marshall mentioned, but it's been around manufacturing for a very long time. But the nascent part of it is about applying it to software and systems development. So Marshall, perhaps you can talk about some of the flow accelerators that we have in SAFe and why they're important.
Sure. So I'll go back to the example earlier, since we're looking at portfolio flow in this example. When I talked about some of the key things you need to think about for implementing LPM early in your implementation, one of those is visualizing and limiting work in process. Speaking personally, you can't underestimate visualizing your work. Many Agile teams are familiar with the concept of a Scrum board, which was a valuable way to make things transparent for a Scrum team. But when we think about visualizing and limiting work in process, we want to bring that to the next level. And that means actually implementing a Kanban system. And becoming one of the flow accelerators in SAFe means that we also have to attach this to the backlogs at scale, because SAFe is a scaling framework. It's not just about one or two teams working together or independently. It's about dozens of teams perhaps working together, or hundreds. So when we visualize and limit work in process, we actually enable the flow accelerators to happen, because we can see the work moving through the system. We can apply lean concepts to that. So it is a foundational element of many of the concepts that we apply in the framework. For example, addressing bottlenecks. If we don't map the value stream and map how we believe flow should flow or does flow through the system, then we can't really measure it. We can't create a system for the accelerator number one. So we first have to visualize and limit work in process. Then we can see the system run. We can see work flow through it, and we will be aware of bottlenecks in the system, which we can then address in flow accelerator number two. Next one I want to talk about, and we kind of move on, is working in smaller batches. Batch size optimization is something that I think all teams struggle with, even not using a scaling framework like SAFe. We have to, again, be able to see the work in the system and have it to be transparent before we really know whether our batches are optimized or not. We call this running the system. We have to have also language and a model to use, and SAFe introduces that SAFe requirements model, or the SAFe enterprise backlog model. And as Richard, as you've been talking about, epics and features. And so we have to have those concepts and that language operating effectively as a communication tool within the teams, along with visualizing and limiting all the other flow accelerators, so that over time teams can look at that holding cost, transaction costs, and really decide, well, we said we were going to do, for example, 10 features this increment, but we only did 2. Well, perhaps that's an indicator that the batch size was too big, or there were other extreme dependencies that we weren't made aware of. So these accelerators can be very helpful to ultimately achieving better business outcomes.
Great. Speaking of business outcomes, what we want to do is we want to measure those business outcomes over outputs. The thing is, it's much easier to measure outputs. How many stories did we complete? How many features did we complete? How many defects did we squash? And all sorts of things like that. But it doesn't really show us whether or not we're delivering value to our customers, and that resulting in a value exchange to our business, where our business can make more revenue, delight customers, grow the business, and so on. So it's really important that we are measuring outcomes over outputs. Now, that doesn't mean that measuring outputs is not important. It still is, because it gives us some context to our business outcomes. Because perhaps we're only, doing one or two things in a PI, which has a lot of people on the Agile release train, and perhaps we're not achieving a lot of outcomes. And my thinking is, it's more important to focus on our business outcomes than focus on how many features did we deliver in this PI. We delivered 20 features in this PI, but out of those features, which one of them actually moved the needle in the business? And most of the time, the answer is we just don't know. But the good news is that we can instrument those things today to find out what the outcome of implementing those outputs are. And so there's a measurement model that's in SAFe. It was introduced in SAFe 5, and it continues to be refined in SAFe 6 and beyond, because the framework is also a continuous flow model. We're always updating the framework. So this measurement model includes three aspects: outcomes that we just discussed. Do our portfolio solutions, do they meet the needs of the customers and our business? How are we flowing? How efficient is the portfolio at delivering value to the customer? And competency. How well are we adopting the principles and practices in SAFe that enable business agility at all levels of the framework? So let's continue with the theme on business outcomes. So here are some of the things that we want to measure when it comes to business outcomes. For example, the Pirate metrics, which I like a lot, and it's called Pirate metrics. Dave McClure created them because the initial of each of those different metrics spells ARG. So it's kind of like the sound that a pirate makes. Fulfillment, if we're fulfilling a consumer loan, how many people that apply for a loan actually went ahead and finished the loan? How long did time did it take to make a decision? What is the approval rate? Customer lifetime value, and so on. And we also need to look at our support, because customer support tells you how well are we being successful with our customers. And of course, SAFe is used for manufacturing as well as designing those new products that we're going to manufacture. So we have some example APIs for those as well. But we also need to measure flow. And which of these metrics have you had the most success with, Marshall? Maybe all of them, I'm not sure.
Well, of the six metrics here for measuring flow and SAFe, there's a few of them that are easier, let's say, to implement and to get value for decision making out of than others. So, for example, when we implement SAFe, one of the things that we're doing is we're designing a new system, a new operating model that is probably very much so different than the one in which your organization maybe was using before. And a key flow metric in there is flow predictability, otherwise known as planning predictability measure, if you will. And what that is a statistical process control that shows whether the system is in control or out of control. And that becomes really important because customers, the people who actually pay the bills, really want organizations to be predictable. And we can use a number of different common industry products to understand that. For example, if you have a smartphone and you've ever purchased an upgrade for a smartphone, you probably didn't do as much research if you've already owned every iPhone like I have since the very first one about the new iPhone. You just said, well, I know they got some cool new features and I trust Apple produces a very high class product. So I'm just going to go and go to my favorite mobile provider and get my new phone or whatever it is I do. So in much the same way, flow predictability allows internal and external customers, depending on your context, to utilize that metric to understand whether the system is flowing or not. Flow load, the number of work items that are currently in progress or waiting. It's a view into your Kanban system, if you will, your visualization of work. And other things here are really used proportionately. I like to approach this, by the way, as a consultant, not with a big bang, like let's do all these and let's do all of them instantly. Let's start simple, like it says in the Agile Manifesto. Let's start with one thing, implement it, make it an effective and accurate measurement of the system, and then add on to it later. So, for example, flow predictability is an easy one to start with. The other things come with discipline and tool utilization, perhaps, but ultimately, we want to determine whether or not the outcomes of the system are actually supporting what we actually say we're going to do. And we use these flow metrics to do that.
Oh, great. Speaking of flow, we need to move on to the next successful thing, number 5. And Marshall, you talked about some of the things that we can do to get LPM started at the very beginning of the SAFe journey. And this is basically showing you the different steps that you need to do to adopt LPM. And we call it adopting LPM instead of implementing LPM, because it's more something that you adopt over time. We also wanted to distinguish the difference between the LPM adoption versus implementing SAFe overall. And these steps are not necessarily linear. So you might do some work for strategizing, you might do some work for aligning and organizing, and kind of going back and forth between the different steps within this journey. And we'll talk about in a moment all the things that are available in SAFe Studio that you can use, because LPM is probably the most widely covered discipline in SAFe Studio. So it's pretty cool, the stuff that we have of that. So Marshall, which of these ones are you the most familiar with, or that you would like to speak to, that that are your favorite kinds of assets, or the different steps that you like the most?
Sure. So I think I'll just speak generally to everything. In this case, a lot of folks have worked very hard over the past several years to create some really, really great content. The practice guides, particularly that you see that follow the adoption roadmap, have a great amount of detail. For those of you who are new to LPM, you can follow the videos and follow the practice guides to create your own knowledge and your own understanding and learning of LPMs as a function and how you can use it in your organization. There are a lot of successful patterns that we provided that come directly from field work, from our actual implementations. And there's also some great tools that are available. For example, participatory budgeting is part of LPM. And there's a really great software tool, in fact, one of the only ones that are in the world that can enable you to actually facilitate participatory budgeting using a digital tool rather than a manual spreadsheet or paper, for example. So we strongly recommend you utilize the community resources here because it can help jumpstart your LPM practice.
Great. And Marshall, I really thank you for being involved in the very first LPM Alpha class that I taught out in Silicon Valley. It was really cool having you there and getting all the feedback. You have definitely made a difference in the quality of the other materials that we've developed over time.
Thank you, Richard.
We are going to be having some courses coming up. LPM course will be coming up in September 26th and September 27th. And I'll also be doing an implementing SAFe class on September 12th and September 15th. If you don't know a lot about value stream management and you would like to learn more, besides the knowledge that you can get in the SAFe framework, we also have an ebook that we can share that I authored, and just put your name in chat or send us an email to Agile Rising, and we can send you a copy of that ebook at no charge. Anything that you wish to promote, Marshall? You know, it's like being on a Tonight Show or something like that. And what things do you have coming up?
Well, I actually have a presentation that I'm giving at the SAFe Summit in August, coming up very soon. Super excited about that and a little bit nervous. I'll be up on stage presenting on the topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is connecting strategy to execution, which in many ways is involved in the things that we talked about today. It'll be very specific about a systems model and some guidance that we have created and utilize with various clients. So I strongly encourage everybody, if you can attend the SAFe Summit, love to see you there. If not, check us out in the SAFe community after on the recorded videos.
Okay, it looks like we have 1 minute left, or a few minutes left. Does anyone have any other questions than what's been answered already in our Q&A? Okay, it looks like we've answered most of the questions that are in there. So we'd like to thank you very much for attending today's webinar. We hope you enjoyed it. And remember, if you want to learn more, you know, we periodically hold a LPM class and implementing SAFe classes where we also speak about that. And you're going to find that in our LPM class is kind of a bit different from some of the other partners who teach LPM, is that we not only go into the content from the framework, but also go into things like, you know, how do you create a business strategy for the portfolio? Because my saying is, if you have strategic themes, but you don't have a strategy, then they're just dreams. What are you actually going to achieve if you achieve those strategic themes? What did it result in? Did it move the needle in the business? Did it help you go from the current state to a future state? Chances are it has not. So to me, it's very important that we also understand strategy in a very deep way, and we'll also cover that in the LPM course. Well, thanks everyone. Happy Friday. Any last words, Marshall?
No,
I don't mean it like that.
last many words. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Richard. Always love working with you. Thanks
Same
everyone else
here.
for joining on Friday of all days. So,
Julia, would you like to wrap us up?
Sure. Thanks everyone for joining. And like Richard said, if you are interested in the ebook, just reach out at info@agilerising.com.